Good Friday afternoon, evening, wherever you might be. Victor, another week down. Another week of holiday,
Another
if you
week
will.
down.
Right?
Another week closer to not being on holidays.
How many more weeks till your daughter goes back to school?
I don't know, mid-September, a month.
Mid-September. Okay, another month. There are kids that have been in school here 2 weeks already.
Well, you started earlier as well.
Exactly. And get out in May. So, hi, by the way, my name's Darren. This over here is Victor, and we are the co-host of a podcast called DevOps Paradox. And just like that show, this show, on Fridays, well, I don't know. Let me do that one again. Wait, well, I can't edit this, can I? Well, I guess technically I could. Podcast comes out on Wednesdays at 6 a.m. Eastern. Fridays, if we're around, we do this live show. And right now it's really easy because we're both sort of locked in and not traveling. So it's easy to do the show. But I have a feeling, Victor, mid-September,
Madness.
you're going again.
Madness.
So we may not be around so much in September. We'll see how it goes.
I'll be around beginning of first half of 2024. I decided almost no travels.
Really?
Yes.
Well, that's actually great to hear. Because that means we can record the full podcast in the first 6 months, and then we're just done for the year.
Exactly.
That's a little too much inside baseball, I think. We record things early. In fact, if you listen to this week's episode that we did with Dotan, where is it? There we go. Why is it not coming up? Oh, I know why. That's weird. There it goes. Still not there. There we go. We had Dotan on from Logs.io, and we actually recorded him, I believe, in May or June. And it just came out today. So we're usually about 10 to 12 weeks in advance. Why? Because we have to plan for the weeks that we're traveling.
Yeah, exactly.
It has to be edited. Karen, good to see you. Thanks for being here live with us today. This episode I thought was interesting because all three of us, me, you, and Dotan, all work for companies based on open source.
Correct.
Or at least have an offering based on open source, correct?
Absolutely correct.
Now, we'll get into that a little bit more later today. But with Dotan in specific, he's a CNCF ambassador. He ran KCD, or is one of the organizers for KCD Israel, and still thinking if he wants to do it again, which I think that's a fair statement. But I thought it was a very interesting conversation just about how really vendors can't exist without the community, and the community can't exist without vendors.
Exactly.
It can, but there's an imbalance when it's not in that balance. I'll put it that way.
I would say that I do not know of a single example where community exists without vendors for mid or large size projects. Small kind of, hey, I can do this library for Node.js, that yes. Right? But if you're talking about projects that cannot operate without many people involved.
Good, bad, or indifferent. That's true of Fedora and CentOS. Right?
I mean, Linux, let's say, kind of,
and
there
Linux.
is no Linux without community only. Linux doesn't exist.
Well, we'll talk about that later today, too. We'll see how that goes. There's going to be a lot of very interesting, how can I say this? We may be editing ourselves live today. We'll see how it goes. But anyway, podcast comes out Wednesday, 6 a.m. Eastern. And thanks for Dotan to coming on this week. Yes, I did get up. And he was that was his anniversary at Open Observability. He also has a podcast, too, called Open Observability Talks. Now, Dotan, if you're watching this, once a month, is that really a podcast? Okay. Well, it's a little nudge, Dotan. Actually, his content's really good, so go check him out. Okay. Along the same lines with open source, there's actually two posts, and these two sort of come together, and they are from completely different parts of the world from an open source perspective. This write-up from Carvel, which is part of Red Hat. Correct? It came out of Red Hat. They are talking about open source projects are suffering from attrition. And I've been having some internal conversations with some people I don't know that I have an answer, but my spidey sense is tingling on why this might be happening. I'll get into it in a minute. But anyway, okay, stop blaming the pandemic for how we work. I don't think the pandemic has anything to do with open source attrition. Do you want to weigh in on that one? You're muted if you're talking.
There we go. No, absolutely not. I mean, pandemic has nothing. I mean, there might be a bit more contributions during pandemic because people were at home and, not knowing what to do, and Netflix maybe was not an option. But in general, no, no pandemic-related excuses.
Not big numbers anyway. Somewhat individual. It's sort of like when you talk about inflation, and you always get the inflation numbers from the government. And it's like 3%, big headline number, 3%, or whatever the numbers were in the US a while back. But what really matters is, to me, what is my personal inflation number? Because back when eggs, at least in the US, went from $1.50 a dozen to over $9 a dozen, and eggs make up primarily 2 of my meals a day, my personal inflation rate went through the roof. Right? So it's that. Anyway, what's up, Ingen? Good to see you. It's interesting how this post from the Carvel team is sort of phrased. It's like, we need people to work on our project. We need people to work on our project. This sort of reminds me about an episode that we recorded this past week, to where the author of a blog post was saying, we deserve. And that's sort of the same feeling I get from this blog post. I'm smelling a little bit of entitlement to this. Not in a bad way, but just the way it's being set up.
With the exception that I'm going to mention later, I don't know of a single project that has a significant percentage of not corporate contributions. That is not a tiny in size. The only exceptions are small projects. And in small projects, I include big projects that are plugin based, so kind of each plugin is a project by itself. Right? So when a private person can own, and maybe 2 or 3 can own the whole project, yes. Personal, private contributions, I've seen that a lot. The moment it's above certain size, I haven't seen a project that does not primarily rely on corporate contributions. And if that's the case, then the question is following. Do other companies, beyond the one that is actually primary maintainer of a project, do other companies have self-interest to contribute?
This week's show couldn't have been written any better. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so I want to go back to the. Remember, I said I had an idea. My spidey sense was tingling.
Mm-hmm.
This is the conversation I've been having internally with some people.
Mm-hmm.
I think about what I'm going to call the heyday of open source, which I'm going to basically label, and this isn't really true, but go with me for a minute, basically 2000 to 2010.
Okay.
That's when a lot of the big open source projects that we know and love today were born, was in that decade. Agree or disagree?
I agree, yes.
The big, the ones, if they've lived this long, that was probably the window that they were in. Okay.
Yes.
During that time, I was basically, what would I have been? So I basically would have been 35 to 45, age-wise.
Okay.
Okay. I'm basically playing up the generational thing at this point. During that time was when the Gen Xers were at sort of peak years. Now the millennial generation is moving into sort of that window. Right? That's 2010 to now. 2012 to now.
You're
and
gonna
coming in behind.
blame it on kids now.
I'm not blaming. I'm just saying there's different work strategies and different ways of, not work strategies, different ways of working as you look at the different generations. The work, I'm going to use this term broadly, the work ethic between generations is very different. Broad brush. So
yes.
Also, there was this one thing before 2010 that didn't exist, at least not the way it does today, social media. I'll blame social media. We've got more diversions now than we ever had back in those heydays.
Diversions, okay. I thought that you would say diversity. Because
No, diversions.
so what was happening at that time that you're mentioning is that we had a number of people contributing to open source, whatever that number was, much smaller than today, and a handful of projects, right? If you're going to contribute at that time to a project, you could pick one of the 10. Now, bigger number of contributors is spread across infinitely bigger number of projects.
We've had a Cambrian explosion of projects in the past 15 years.
Yes. So I'm not necessarily saying that less people contribute. I would actually argue the other
It's
way
probably
around.
more. Yeah.
But it's spread across infinitely bigger number of projects.
So there's some dilution there. So
Yes.
we have more diversions. We have more dilutions. There has to be another D, otherwise this is going to fall apart. More despair.
Now, what is very different from back then that you mentioned and right now is that the percentage or the number of people contributing to open source as being their full-time job increased drastically. Right? Back in the days, how many people you know who were paid to work on open source?
Very small number.
I don't mean contribute, being paid, meaning
Paid. Yeah.
I'm professional contributor.
Very, very small number.
I mean, it's still probably small compared to the total number of people,
Yeah.
but much bigger, much bigger. I mean, I know that where you work, there is a significant number of engineers dedicated to open source. I know that where I work, there is a significant number of engineers, at least compared to the percentage of the size of the company, dedicated to open source. And I can go on with number of companies for 3 days that are having full-time employees dedicated to it.
So I want to look into this other post that was here as well. It's a variation of what we just saw with the Carvel. The guy that was maintaining it, this, I guess it's called Mock, M-O-Q, because it's a mocking framework for .NET. Never heard of it before. But it's interesting, all these stories came out this week, or when I was doing research for this. And the maintainer, so this feels like a single person maintainer, unlike Carvel. So this is a different side of the story. At some point, like for a long time, sustaining the mock library became untenable. That story sounds very familiar, doesn't it, as a single maintainer, especially if you're not getting paid. Tried other things. Sponsors, contributors, changing licensing terms. We'll get to that in a few moments. All are typically met with some form of hostility from a large group of consumers who have no intention of supporting the software. Stop. If you're using something, you should pay for it. What does pay mean? It can mean a number of different things. It could be cash. It could be time that you support, also help with the project. It's when you're just taking from open source and not contributing in some material way. Maybe you're just helping update the docs. That's huge. A lot of people think they got to write code. No, they don't have to write code. Getting documentation usable, getting examples written are huge in the adoption of any open source project.
I would go
Right.
as far as to say that excluding projects that do not require maintenance, because there are projects that I wrote it. Maybe I will do a commit next year, but it's stable. It does what it's supposed to do. Small thing. If I exclude those, I would say that projects that do not reach certain size, that commercial offering becomes a viable option for that project, are doomed to fail. What do you say to that?
I would mostly agree with it, I think. Mostly.
Because it's very simple. You need people dedicated to the project. Right? Do we agree on that?
Yes.
Now,
agree with
if
that.
you have people dedicated, I cannot expect people to be dedicated on something and live from thin air. Right? So if you're part-time hobby contributor, great, you should be. I think that's absolutely amazing, and I encourage everybody. But if a project requires full-time dedication from one or more people, that person or those people need to get salaries. And we saw that expectation that you're gonna get a decent salary, and I'm not speaking about getting rich, salary, through donation is not working, right? So the only option is to go commercial. And when I say go commercial, I do not necessarily mean always, hey, we have enterprise version for sale. It could be Kubernetes, right? For example, we don't necessarily, majority of corporate contributions do not sell directly that Kubernetes they're contributing, but it's important for their business, like Azure, Google, what's not, right? It needs to be commercial. And this is the part where I think that many people are going to freak out and disagree. And we want open source to be 100% open and 100% based on contributions. That does not work. You need dedication. People dedicated to something need to be paid so they can continue being dedicated to that something. And the only way to get paid is to sell something.
Seems basic to me. In fact, Dotan went into that on this week's episode. Some people have a romanticized view of open source.
It never existed. Never existed.
It didn't.
Or it existed for a while, right? I can name projects that were relatively successful, completely free from anything commercial, but only up to a point. Up to a certain size.
And then somebody had to get paid.
Somebody has to, I mean, let's face it, who here lives without a salary? Kind of like, I mean, maybe if you have a rich uncle that just died and left you millions in inheritance, and then, yeah, you can do that. I cannot do that.
I can't do that. Let me get back to the story here, though, because this story goes a little bit different than the Carvel story. So in January, the maintainer of Mock blogged about a tool that they're going to be building called SponsorLink, specifically saying they're trying something new. It was going to collect GitHub email addresses and hash them, and then ask for sponsorship within the IDE if they aren't already sponsoring. So basically, from my perspective, spyware.
Yes.
Right. That, to me, that is spyware.
Exactly.
GitHub issue said this could be privacy and GDPR. Author said, bag it. Not a privacy violation. Okay, whatever. It went in. People were understandably caught off guard. Now, here's the deal. If you are using a project, maintainer said in January, this month being, I think this was written in, it was August, I think was when it was posted. So 6 to 7 months, easily. You're using something that now you're caught off guard. Okay, you're obviously not understanding the tools that you're using. Mm-hmm. It's a different conversation for a different day. Flag for security issues, new dependency, making network calls. Again, not so great. People became pretty irate, working to rip Mock out of their setups. or said they would. But see, that's the typical knee-jerk reaction, which we're getting ready to have in a few moments.
Or said that they would.
Or said that they would, right. Malware, bashing library, whatever. Roughly a day later, change was reverted. Still plans to continue with it. This is the case of an independent maintainer. Can't do it for free. Working different ideas. Things hadn't worked before, so he's trying this to see if it works. At what point do you basically say, forget it, I'm just going to delete this thing. People aren't going to pay me for it. I'm just going to remove it. Done.
That's, I mean, the problem is with size, right? 1, 2, 3 people projects, they're very, very difficult. They're too small, typically. But if it would be slightly bigger, then the answer is relatively simple, right? Create SaaS or sell or have enterprise features for self-managed.
Right.
That's what everybody does. But the problem is when you're too small to do that.
Right. So Sean, who's the author of this post, has a social contract. The way he phrases it, you get to expect things of an OSS project to the extent that you contribute to that project or are willing to help. If my phrasing of that is, if all you're doing is taking, forget it.
Yeah.
Everything else should be gratitude or grace. If all you're doing is taking, you need to cut the person some slack or be thankful for it. What you can't be is a bonehead. I'm self-editing right now. I almost said the S word. Stop being stupid.
Almost there, but not there.
So anyway, I just think it's interesting between our episode that came out today, that we recorded basically 3 months ago, lines up with these two stories about two different variations, but it's basically the same story. You have, I'm not going to call out people that are hacking and using open source. Right? In fact, I'm not going to go after SMBs. I'm going after the people that are saying, I am owed this. I deserve this open source project that I'm using that somebody else is doing all the work on. It has to meet all of my specifications all of the time, no questions asked. And if there's any downtime, it's your problem. That's bull.
That's just silly. I wouldn't bother even answering that.
I think the proper way to answer those is thank you for letting us know your concerns. That's it.
Exactly.
And move on.
You mean automated message?
Yeah, pretty much. But anyway, I think both of these posts, Sean's post here was very well written and good to go. So I would recommend reading both the Carvel, which I think is sort of a oh woe is me type post. I'm sorry for anybody that's listening from the Carvel project, but that's what it sounded like to me.
Carvel never got to the stage that it attracted community. That's the problem that Carvel has.
But looking at it from an individual's, and Sean is not the maintainer of mock. Let's clear that up. But I read both of these, and if you're working in an organization that's not contributing to open source and you're using open source, help nudge your people in a direction, hopefully in a positive direction. What does that mean? Does it mean hard cash? Does it mean support? What does support mean? Maybe you're working for a company that, I'll just make up something here. Let's say you're working for a content distribution network, like Fastly, Cloudflare, somebody like that. And the project that you support needs bandwidth. Those are in-kind donations. It is cash, but tell you, most of the time cash is not as important as bandwidth for a lot of these projects, especially if they get... I mean, could you imagine the hosting bill, the egress fees for Kubernetes before there were...
No,
this is the Docker Hub issue, right? How much does Docker Hub cost? Egress is not free. Even though Cloudflare has free egress, trust me, it's not free. Okay, so that's sort of the lineup here of vendors and OSS. And oh, by the way, yesterday, HashiCorp went BSL for all upcoming releases.
Yeah.
Let me get my thoughts out first, and then you can have the floor.
Okay.
I'm fine with this. This does not bother me at all. It rubs me wrong a little bit, but I do not blame them for making this change in their company. Period. I'm done.
I don't blame them either. It's their right. Anybody, not their right. Anybody is right. Anybody could fork right now, Terraform, fork it, and change the license to be anything you want. Literally anything you want. Anybody has that right, and they have the right as well, just as anybody else. It's open source. They can change the license. They cannot change it retroactively. They can change and say all the future effort goes under this license, right? And
right.
If
So,
I'm not
but let
happy
me
with that,
let me correct you there a little bit. From this point forward, they are not open source. They are
Yes.
source available.
exactly.
Big difference.
Yeah, but what I want to say is that if it's true open source, you have the right to change the license. You have the right to fork and change the license. You have the right to do whatever you want with it if it's permissive license, right? I could fork the version of Terraform before this change and change it to license called Victor's license. You need to call him on his phone and ask nicely to use it type of license. I have the right to do that. Now, so they have the right, and I cannot blame somebody for doing what they have the right to do. Now, it gives me a bad feeling because, yes, some companies who did not contribute that much to the project are potentially hoping to earn money from the project, and that's a bad situation. But on the other hand, HashiCorp, just as many others, wouldn't be where they are, wouldn't be the size that they feel threatened by AWS or whomever is threatening them, and I don't know, without being truly open source. So it's kind of, this is great. Being open source is absolutely amazing to reach, I don't know, 100 million or 1 billion or whatever. And then once we get to that figure, then we're going to forget that and say, oh, we cannot get to the next trillion with this license. All I'm saying is that, yes, it's a bad situation. Somebody will benefit from your work, but also because somebody benefited from your work is that valuable right now.
So I have pulled up the history of the license file on Vault.
Mm-hmm.
So yesterday was when the BSL change commit came in. The initial commit was however many years ago, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, doing the math. The initial commit was, where am I? Mozilla Public License, which is an OSI license. Right? No problems. Then they updated the license last October. Ah, interesting. I don't know that would have made, like, I don't think that would have set off any alarms to me. Yeah. But now, there it goes. So adding explicit MPL license for subpackage, blah, blah, blah. Updating the license from MPL to BSL. Add missing license, update copyright, fix test, blah, blah, blah.
So here's my theory, and I might be completely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
They can change the license now because there is a certain dependency on HashiCorp projects. And I think that this is mostly about Terraform, I believe. Not that much others. Anyways, they can change the license now because though the only thing that matters are contributions from big companies to the providers, namely hyperscalers. And Terraform reached the size that actually they cannot not contribute. Right? Now, if you go back 10 years in time, would do you think that if this was commercial license that actually companies would be contributing their time to build providers for Terraform?
Near 0% chance.
Exactly. So, yes, you might be threatened by others commercially right now, but you would not have providers that you're having right now, and I'm talking about Terraform, if you put that license before.
Okay, so I'm going to backpedal you on that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to self-edit. I think I probably would have written providers. If the engine is source available but not open source, I don't care if I write a provider for that or not. I'm actually okay writing a provider for that. Is it going to be my highest priority? Maybe, maybe not, depending on if my customers, as a different vendor that's writing that provider, is using that tool or not.
Bingo. That's the thing.
Right.
But that's now.
Yes.
When you're big. That's not in the past when you were not.
No, I'm talking about me. But I'm saying I'm a small person that needs to create a provider that could be consumed. We'll just use we'll say Terraform, whether that's it or not. But we'll just use that as the example. Mm-hmm. I initially said no, I would not have written a provider for Terraform, and I'm backtracking on that. It's like, well, if Terraform was the standard of doing things, then I would have considered doing a provider for it.
But I'm talking about the time before that. I'm talking about this is a new tool used by a niche, a small number of people, right?
That's the key part.
Because
small
everybody's using Puppet and Chef.
Correct.
And Ansible, right? And we have a new tool whose future depends on providers, and providers having the coverage that they need to have. And we desperately need contributions from companies, not individuals, companies, for a tool that is actually not making much of a difference, right? It's not the most used tool.
Right. I'm curious. This is the reason why I'm looking this up real quick. I want to look at the history on this one. So Terraform was licensed July of 2014. So let's say I was in July of 2013. Actually, no. Let's stay normal time. Let's say it's December of 2014. Mm-hmm. So that was Terraform 0.0 dot something probably, or 0.1 dot something. Would I have at that point in time created a provider? If my existing clients was using Terraform, they, whatever reason, they were able to start using Terraform within their organization, and it was going to make my client's life easier by creating a provider for Terraform. Would I have done it? The answer is probably yes.
Exactly, but again, I think that you're too early in time, right? That's when the gravity is big enough, and you say, "Hey, actually, it's not one customer. I'm not going to invest in provider for one customer of mine who wants to use my services through Terraform. But look at this. There is a surge in demand.
Right.
Everybody's using it. Right?
Right.
And everybody's using it only if there are providers, because it's a chicken and egg problem.
Right. Because Terraform itself is just an engine. HashiCorp, please forgive me for sort of broad brushing that one, but it's an engine that really lives on the providers. So
what I'm really trying to say is that I'm completely okay with SaaS, commercial SaaS. I'm completely okay with open core. I'm completely okay with commercial. I'm completely okay with open source. I have no strong feelings that one thing must be one license or another. I think that there is space for all of those. I'm just saying that, hey, let's not forget that we can do this only because of what open source enabled us as a company to do.
So we're going to move on from this. I can't believe we talked 35 minutes about open source licenses. But I have one more.
Oh, there's no more.
One more. Just one.
Okay.
Announced roughly today, the Open Enterprise Linux Association.
Okay. What the heck is that?
So it's an association from CIQ, which I'd never heard of before, Oracle, I've heard of them, and SUSE. So basically what they're going to be doing is maintaining a community repository for enterprise Linux sources, primarily because of the Red Hat blow up a couple of weeks ago.
Is it kind of like managing variations of the enterprise commercial Linux's kind of?
Correct.
Okay, got it.
So here it is. No subscriptions, no passwords, no barriers, and most importantly, freeloaders welcome. Because that was one of the things that came out of Red Hat, if I remember the sources correctly, is they were calling people freeloaders. Going back to the Sean post about mock, that's sort of my thing. It's like, if you're a single person open source maintainer, it's hard to have freeloaders.
Yeah.
But at enterprise level, this is where the question comes into play.
Now, I have mixed feelings about this because, okay, that's all cool and stuff like that, but let's not forget that those companies that are forming this foundation or whatever it is, they have commercial interest in that as well. So kind of like, it's not we are actually good people. It's like, hey, there is an opportunity for SUSE and for Oracle and for whatever the third company is whose name I sick.
Yeah.
So
these are the guys behind Rocky Linux. That's what it is. Anyway, I like it. I don't like it, if you will. Now, I think it's interesting that it's actually over on GitLab. Interesting, not good, not bad, just interesting.
Yeah.
Why did they choose GitLab over GitHub? Don't know.
And why didn't it go to Linux Foundation?
I don't know. That's a good question. Because SUSE, I believe, had said that they were going to come up with something, and I think that was the precursor to this. Let's look at the announcement here. The announcement was blah, blah, blah. Trying to find the... Here it is. Starting later this year, OpenELA will provide sources necessary for downstreams compatible with Red Hat Enterprise Linux to exist, with initial focus on RHEL versions 8, 9, and possibly 7. Because 7 goes EOL next July, I think.
Rubs me the wrong way, to be honest. Okay, Oracle, I'm not sure what they're running on. Maybe they're running on RHEL, and maybe they have they don't want to. They have interest in it. But what's the relation between SUSE and RHEL? Come on. Kind of like, SUSE has its own Linux distribution, and you have open source or commercial or whatever they have. I don't know. I'm not following, but it's a completely different Linux distribution with different variations. And now explain it to me, apart from doing a good marketing, which is not going to last long, what's the relation between SUSE and RHEL? Come on, technically.
Here it is. So this was from July 11th. SUSE preserves choice in enterprise Linux by forking RHEL with a $10 million investment. 10 million plus. So this, I believe this was the predecessor to what is now happening here. They just found some other people to pitch in. That's what it feels like.
I mean, if what the RHEL is doing with CentOS and what's not is not fair, it's not okay, excellent, let's switch to a different Linux. Let's use SUSE maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
That kind of, it sounds like rubs me the wrong way. Kind of. Simply SUSE had no relation with RHEL, and all of a sudden now that CentOS story broke up, doesn't feel right. And then there is Oracle, kind of like it's an open source killer company. Kind of like we kill every single open source project, kind of that we touch. But we are going to create a foundation right now.
Association.
Okay.
Association. Okay. All right. So let's move into some happier items.
Okay.
This has been okay. So mount point for S3 is now available. You've probably not heard of this.
I don't know what it is. What is it?
Okay. So basically, do you remember Fuse? The file system
No.
Fuse?
No.
So there was an implementation of Fuse to where you could use S3 as just a mount point as a drive for Linux.
Okay.
Well, now mount point from AWS, it's an open source project, basically replaces that. So now you can use S3 as just a mount point on your EC2 instance, or anywhere really, because there's packages for Debian, RHEL, everything. You can just install it and off you go. Why would you want to use this? The thing that's interesting about this is if you get into there's a blog post at the end of this. I meant to use that instead of this one. The blog post gets into the point at the bottom. Let me get down here a little bit. So basically all you'd have to do is just you'd CD to the directory and you can just do your normal file system. So you don't have to remember the crazy S3 commands. But here's why it sort of got me thinking. So pricing, there's no extra charges other than just normal S3 charges, makes sense. But it's this performance. In fact, I'm going to blow this up some more. Oh, come on. Really? You're going to do that to me. Mount point is able to take advantage of the elastic throughput offered by S3, which is true, right? Really fat pipe, including data transfers up to 100 gig per second. Now, you're going to have a really big EC2 instance in order for that pipe to be available to you.
Yeah.
But think about, instead of having, that's going to be faster than, unless you've got the local disk, like the local, it's going to be faster than the EBS volume, potentially, if you've got a large enough. But there's a lot of,
cool,
a lot of things have to be checked.
Regional, right?
It is regional. It would have to be,
Yeah.
right? But if you're working with that bucket, so you've got, let's say you're working East 1, you've got an EC2 instance in East 1, and you're working with a bucket in East 1. But then under the hood with S3, you can set up replication to send it off to somewhere else.
Okay.
Now,
Okay.
you don't want to do, collision, but you don't want to do a two-way replication. That would be sort of bad.
Yeah.
But if you needed to basically send it, if you're treating AWS as your external data centers, which you shouldn't, by the way, but if you can't break that mold yet, and you're saying, okay, East 1 is my primary data center, my backup is West 2, great. You're going to be pumping everything out to S3 and just replicating it all over, all the time. So that way when East 1 goes down, you spin up your West 2, all your data's already there, in theory. This is the crazy one. Mount Point supports basic. Now, it doesn't do all the POSIX file system things, but it does most of the things. And it can read files up to 5 terabytes in size. It's crazy. So anyway, that is Mount Point for S3. StableCode, Stability AI. You've heard of Stability AI? I'm assuming you have?
No, I haven't. Stability AI.
So they were one of the first ones to have an open source LLM for image generation.
Okay.
So now they've got a code way of doing things. This is their answer.
Images.
No. To generate code.
Okay.
That's it. So that's
Nice.
that's all it is. One more AWS thing too. AWS Toolkit. Have you ever installed the AWS CLI by hand?
I mean, probably. I mean, I have.
Okay.
Well, certainly, I don't remember anymore. Is it Python something? Some people
It is.
install, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So basically now there is a Dockerized version of the CLI. And this guy keeps it up to date.
Okay.
So I thought that's good. Because I've built this type of image before.
Me too. I mean, I had quite a few cases where I had to execute AWS CLI and then, push it into an image.
Yep, it's like Amazon provides a container for this already, but it's good. It's good, but it weighs in a little heavy for me at 387 meg. He's got it down to as low as 100 meg.
Nice.
And other reasons why doing. I would love to see now that ChainGuard. I want to see a ChainGuard version of this.
Yeah.
But that's that. What's up?
Hey, Martin.
Where am I at? Okay, this one. Okay. S3 scanner, one more. Okay, this one I thought was really interesting. This isn't just for, even though it says S3 scanner, think S3 compatible scanner. So sort of put that compatible in the middle. You can point it, or you can give it a list of buckets, and it'll go out and check all the buckets and tell you whether or not, it'll tell you the things about the buckets.
Okay.
So multi-threaded scanning, supports many built-in S3 storage providers. Give it a bucket or a bucket file. But then for me, what I thought was interesting about this was finding things that aren't set up correctly. Like, am I going to find a bucket that is open or not?
Okay, kind of linter, like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting. For connect to RabbitMQ for automated scanning at scale. See, this was something that somebody did as a lunchtime project. That's what it sounds like to me. Scans all bucket permissions to find misconfigurations. That's the big one to me. Especially now that I've moved everything off of S3 personally, and I'm using 2 different providers that are S3 compatible because it's a heck of a lot cheaper. S3, even when I'm sending things to Glacier, it ended up being expensive. So I moved out S3. But anyway, S3 scanner. 2 AI reviewers. One is the AI-based PR reviewer and summarizer. You could have done a more silly name. That would have been more than fine. It is a GitHub action. It is MIT licensed. The professional version of this is now live at CodeRabbit, so you can use it, but they've open sourced most of it. So this is one of the tools.
Nice.
And then the second one is Code Review GPT. I still don't believe this phrase at all.
We give engineers the, I mean, it can, the usefulness of those tools, I haven't tried either of the two, but the usefulness looks like, hey, I can actually skip going through silly things when I review and focus on what matters.
Yep. Like this one is sort of silly to me, but exposed secrets, I mean, if you're using GitHub, it's going to be yelling at you all the time anyway.
Yeah.
Slower, inefficient code, maybe. Do you not realize that if I'm writing slower, inefficient code, that means I'm doing it for a purpose?
Yeah.
So that means when the manager comes to me, it's like, hey, we need to get another 50% performance out of this. Okay, let me go think about it. Go remove the for loop, commit, and then we're good. Anyway, this is another one. Now, this is also this one I was still having some problems with. It's not a GitHub action. I think the main reason why I had it's NPM. I just didn't want to deal with it.
Okay.
But they have
so it's kind of just a CLI command that you execute from your pipeline.
You can, yeah. Well, see, that's where I got confused. Is it runs the application CI mode? I don't know. I want to test this out, but I just haven't gotten to it yet for other reasons. But this is from the folks at, where was it? They had their, oh wait, no, that was the previous one. So who is this from? It's a guy. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's a personal.
Oh, you know what? I'm mixing that one back to this one, which was from CodeRabbit. Sorry. I apologize, Code Rabbit, and I apologize to Matt there. Okay. I think I got through everything. Scott, what's up? Good to see you.
Hey, you're in Chicago, Scott. Staying there until October, November, whenever it's KubeCon? Probably not. Anyways.
You got into AI this week.
Yeah,
I think pigs are flying now, if you're doing this.
Yeah, I was avoiding it, and then I kind of, okay. Let's dive into it.
And how was it? Because I didn't watch this one yet.
It's interesting. I would qualify it more as this gives us a glimpse of what's coming, then this is it. If that makes sense. You can see kind of like what's coming rather than, oh, this is better than peanut butter.
I think, well, I'll come back in a minute. And then you also had, this was the final with Whitney for this week?
Final of the season, yes.
Of the season.
Yes.
And that went okay?
Except for not me and Whitney not being coordinated, so not knowing what we're going to do. Apart from that, yeah.
Yeah, details. Mm-hmm. So this is the Gartner hype cycle. Mm-hmm. Just looking at all these. So where do you think we're at right here? Do you think we're coming off this top curve yet?
Are you talking about AI?
Yeah.
Oh, we are very low on the curve.
So you think we're still growing up the initial curve? You don't think we've even peaked yet?
Oh, yeah. Oh, we are not even close to the peak. No.
I don't know. I think we're at the trough of disillusionment already.
No, because we haven't seen it yet. We saw just the first iterations of stuff. Right? So, really, it's been, less than a year since serious solutions came, and they're a handful only. I'm excluding the tiny projects that use, basically, that they do equivalent of sending CURL request to ChatGPT API. Right? If I exclude those, we're at the very beginning. We have only a handful of projects right now. It's going to explode. We're not even close to the top of the hype cycle. That's years away.
Years away, you think?
Oh, yeah.
That's interesting.
I mean, realistically, let's say that if I limit myself now to software, kind of, let's say cloud native, Kubernetes stuff that I'm interested in, right? You know, when the peak will be when I start getting offers, start getting tools that will manage the cluster for me. That will be that's what I'm waiting for. I'm not suggestions, kind of, oh, I sent a request to ChatGPT API, and it tells you that you can, there are those 5 things that you should check to resolve your issue. I wanted to resolve my issue. I don't want suggestions.
Just do it.
Just do it. And I'm confident that that will be happening. It's not 100%, not removing people, not nobody looks at that cluster, but kind of, there are so many silly things happening in clusters that can be resolved automatically. And when I say automatically, I don't mean if-else statements. If this says in events, then do this, which is what we've been doing so far, right? Intelligently resolve issues. Now that's coming.
But to me, that's where it gets back into that would be the plateau of productivity. So if you think we're still headed up to the big point, to the big peak.
So I imagine that big peak being when we've seen much more.
Okay.
Not yet being reliable, right? So that straight line, that's where we kind of settle on, okay, so this is really what I'm using, right? For real. But we haven't seen first what we're going to get from AI. Right? Apart from I can speak with it in the chat and it gives me some answers. Glorified hey Google, right? and I can tell you what I want, and you will generate a picture for me, which is absolutely awesome. But that's just the beginning. We're going to see more features first, and then we're gonna get disappointed with them, and then we're going to make some of them work.
And say the disappointment will be the trough of disillusionment. It's going to be a variation of the dot bomb cycle.
I haven't seen enough to be disappointed yet. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Okay, I heard your bell go off, so it sounds like you probably have another meeting in a few minutes. Is that true?
Watch says something. I'm not watching it. It's just dings.
Dings. Well, I will take that as a cue anyway that we should be wrapping up. We will be back next Friday, but Monday you've got a video coming out of whatever it is.
I don't know yet. Not yet done.
Wednesday podcast. Friday we'll be back. No Whitney next week because y'all are done with that season.
Yes.
So that means you get to take 2 days off next week. What does that feel like?
Off from being in public, you mean?
Yeah. At least, well, I haven't looked at your calendar to see if you're working Thursday and Tuesday too, but
I don't know.
Okay, so I know you're not traveling this month. Are you doing any remote conferences this month? Have you done any remote type deals like that?
I did one yesterday. Or day before yesterday. I'm doing one more in remote in August 19th, something. Guatemala.
Really?
Yes. I don't know what's about. Some conference.
Yeah, but you're not flying.
Something that was supposed to be 2 months ago and then was rescheduled.
Okay. All right. Well, I think Sebastian nailed it right here. Happy weekend, everybody. We will talk to everybody again next week. And until then, go from a happy weekend to a happy week. Let's let that be the story this week, because we were very sad and doom and gloom at the very beginning of the show. Let's not be sad and doom and gloom next week.
I wasn't sad.
No,
I was
you weren't.
doom and gloom maybe, but not
Yeah,
sad.
not sad. Okay. Thanks, everybody, for being with us, and we'll talk to you next week.